Gas operators confirmed that Russia has switched off supplies to the country. Russian energy giant Gazprom says Finland is refusing to pay in Russian currency, a demand from Moscow following the invasion of Ukraine, as a way to sidestep Western financial sanctions. The move also coincides with Finland's application to join NATO. That's in response to the Russian invasion. Russia has already cut off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. Russia is claiming victory in the weeks-long battle for Mariupol's steel plant. It's the final holdout of Ukraine's defence in the otherwise Russian-occupied city, and it's crucial in Russia's offence in the east. ABC Europe correspondent Steve Kinane reports from Dnipro.
For weeks on end, they fought fearlessly. Now they sit in stunned silence. Escorted by Russian-backed forces, the last of the Azov fighters left the steel plant that had doubled as their home and battlefield. Sandra's brother was one of the fighters inside. She's been trying desperately to spot him amid the flood of news footage.
I'm afraid. I don't trust Russia. My only hope is for international organisations like the Red Cross to help.
Russia claims the fighters surrendered. But Ukraine's president says the defenders had been told they could leave.
Ukraine has yet to confirm Russian claims that all troops have now left the plant. If true, it would mark a significant victory for Moscow. It would mean that Russian forces were now in control of Mariupol and able to establish a land corridor between Russia and the illegally annexed territory of Crimea.
In the east, Moscow is stepping up its offence, with reports of shelling doubling in Severodonetsk. Russia's defence minister says its forces will soon take all of Luhansk, which is half of Donbass, including Severodonetsk. The West, however, claims Russia is still making heavy going.
They have made some incremental progress in the Donbass. It is incremental. It is slow. It's uneven.
13 weeks in, Russia's continuing to push against Ukraine's defence in the east, and the next few weeks could be critical to the outcome of this war. Steve Kinane, ABC News, Dnipro.
Turning to sport, William Yang has won the men's 100-metre freestyle at the Australian Swimming Championships in Adelaide. The defending champion and Olympic gold medalist Kyle Chalmers wasn't competing in the event. Yang is a former backstroker who says he recently spent 8 months out of the sport and contemplated quitting before a change of mentality started producing results. Earlier, Olympic triple gold medalist Kaylee McEwen won the women's 200-metre backstroke final. Veteran ABC journalist Caroline Jones is being remembered as a trailblazer and generous mentor who forged a path for women in Australian media. The distinguished broadcaster died this week after a fall at her Sydney home. She was 84.
Hello, I'm Caroline Jones.
She was the familiar face ABC viewers tuned into every week on Australian Story.
What sort of society do we end up with?
With a career spanning more than 5 decades, Caroline Jones was well respected for her hard-hitting journalism.
No help for some of the most helpless in our society later in the program.
Caroline Jones grew up in the tiny New South Wales country town of Murrurundi, the granddaughter of a newspaper editor. She joined the ABC in Canberra in 1963, before becoming the first female reporter on the current affairs TV program This Day Tonight.
I thought, now if I do it well, hopefully it'll open the door for other women. Because when I started in the mid-1960s, there were so few women in this business.
Stand by now for a new edition of Four Corners.
Jones continued to break new ground in the early 70s, joining the ABC's flagship program Four Corners as its first female anchor. It was an appointment that made headlines.
I think it was a columnist in the Daily Telegraph, and he felt moved to confess the Jones girl does not particularly appeal to me as a sex symbol. So, I mean, I was mortified, really.
After 9 years at Four Corners, Jones enjoyed a lengthy career in radio before joining Australian Story in 1996, a role she held until her retirement 20 years later. She won numerous awards for her work.
Congratulations, Caroline Jones.
and was made an Officer of the Order of Australia.
She could do fantastic presenting. She was a fabulous presenter for years on Australian Story. But I think the thing that a lot of us remember is how good she was to other people.
Caroline Jones died this week after a fall at her Sydney home.
I always say she wasn't a trailblazer, she was the trailblazer for women in serious journalism.
A legacy that's helped pave the way for women in Australian media. Husnia Shams, ABC News.
Let's take a quick look at the weather in the capital cities for Sunday before we go. Rain tending to showers in Brisbane, showers in Sydney. Mostly sunny in Canberra, partly cloudy for you in Melbourne and Hobart. Mostly sunny in Adelaide, showers into a possible storm in Perth, and a sunny day for you there in Darwin, getting to 35 degrees. And that's the latest from ABC News. Keep up to date with us at news.abc.net.au and on ABC iView. I'm Mariam Saab. Thank you for your company.
Anatomy of an election.
You've had kitchen sinks, babies and bathwaters, you name it, it's all being thrown.
You've got to be an authentic character. The public figure you out pretty quickly. And the voters' verdict as Australia decides.
Character means a lot to me as far as who I'm going to vote for.
Interesting they scanned back and show his wedding ring.
He just didn't answer the question.
How can I vote there with? That's really tough.
What's going to happen? It's going to get messy, it's going to get ugly, God only knows.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
It's all done. For a full wrap-up of the federal election, download the ABC News app. All the results and how they'll impact you. What happened in every electorate, including yours. Anthony Green's in-depth post-analysis of the key seats. Plus follow the blogs and get notifications so you won't miss a thing. For election news that matters to you, go to abc.net.au/Australia Votes or download the ABC News app. In the final season,
you're the bravest young man I've ever met.
Faith takes on a career-making case.
A 14-year-old boy is giving the doctors full consent to kill him in the tiny hope they might not.
And the past comes back to haunt her.
Faithy, I missed you so much. I want you to leave me!
The thrilling drama. Keeping Faith. Friday on ABC TV. Or log into ABC iView and stream the whole series.
Journey to another world as ABC Classic brings you the Classic 100 Music for the Screen. From Game of Thrones to The Crown, from Mario Brothers to Final Fantasy, from Jaws to Star Wars. Celebrate your favourite music from film, television and gaming with Australia's biggest weekend of classical music. The Classic 100 Music for the Screen. Log in to vote now at abc.net.au/classic.
For me, subject is everything. It's a bit like painting. If it doesn't strike a chord in you, you're not going to do your best work. I love anything that depicts working Australia, the down and get dirty sort of stuff. Just do, don't think, just do. My name's Brett Mongarling. I live at Wongarbin, Central West New South Wales, just outside of Dubbo. I'm probably better known as a sculptor, but I enjoy to paint as well. Sculpting's certainly my bread and butter, but there's nothing like a bit of variety in life. I come out and paint most mornings. It's a way for me to start the day in a nice, quiet, peaceful environment. But it also gets me away from the studio because 9 times out of 10, I'm in the studio or the foundry all day, every day, 7 days a week. So unless I get a bit of a sanity break to start my day, I go absolutely bonkers. This piece at the moment is a maquette that I'm working on for a job for Forbes. It's part of a sculpture trail that extends from Forbes out to Condobolin, but these are going to be life-size Brumbies, and I want them to have that real feel of energy and movement. So they'll be out in the open, so you'll see them from the roadside, sort of tearing across the plains, and hopefully entice people to pull over and go and have a look and a photo opportunity and all the rest of it. This job pretty much started out as a small piece like that. And it doesn't look like much, and it's probably not, but this is what I call a thumbnail. And they're just really quick, little, simple horses that I've put together in about the right dynamic and right shape. Each horse is very much an individual, but each leg, each muscle, each position, each gesture is unique to each horse. And each horse really does need its own character.
And I'm sure casting that bronze is plenty of your blood, sweat and tears, and nearly 18 months of your life.
Most of my work these days is commission work, as far as sculpting goes. And it could be anybody from councils to art societies to private commissions, but largely it's larger organisations commissioning me to do bigger pieces. For me, subject is everything. It's a bit like painting. If it doesn't strike a chord in you, you're not going to do your best work. If the passion's not there, the interest isn't there, then the motivation to do a good job's not there. It should look nice in the park. You know, as you walk in, you'll get that appearance.
That's the idea of it.
Yeah.
Cameron Park is absolutely fantastic already in Wellington, but this is really going to set it off. We're building a Wiradjuri cultural centre there. This wedge-tail eagle will be one of the centre point pieces of this new cultural centre. Wedge-tail eagle is really local and iconic to the Wellington region, and in fact they're still flying around out there now. Brett is a superstar in Dubbo, there's no doubt about that, whether it's the Bill Ferguson statue in our main street, which is a prominent Aboriginal rights activist, right through to you know, gifts for our sister city in Japan, Minakama. We sent some really big kangaroos over there so our Japanese sister city can really appreciate them. One of the things I like doing is when I'm out and about in New South Wales is pointing out to the locals, oh yeah, that one come from Dubbo, you know, that's the, it's one of the good things about Dubbo. We got the Garling Gallery here and so many of these artworks come from Dubbo.
I'm self-taught. I'm a self-taught sculptor. I guess learning's a funny thing, you know, you acquire knowledge all the time, you know, if you're open to learning. Mum was a painter and a potter, and so there's always access to clay and paint and pencils and all that sort of stuff. When I finished high school, I had every intention of getting into art school and turned up to interviews for art schools and the Sydney art schools, and none of them wanted me. If that burning desire is there, it's there. And I started going to exhibitions and meeting other artists and older guys who are now I consider probably my closest friends. And through their encouragement, really got back into it. Their encouragement was, don't worry about art schools, mate, just get out and do it. And that's pretty much my attitude now. Just do, don't think, just do. 1, 2, 3. Ross Horder's been with me for near on 15, 20 years now, is my right-hand man when it comes to the foundry work. The process itself hasn't changed in millennia. The only thing that's really changed within this process are the materials we use. Right. If anything's going to go wrong, it'll go wrong at this point in time. Good. Right. Go. Your heart's always pounding a little bit. I've been pouring my own work for 20 years and we never take it for granted. It can be dangerous. Can't be complacent. Mon's a nickname I got. It was actually a Catholic father gave me. He christened me Mon, the little monster of Lightning Ridge. I got that because I carried around a Hessian bag and I'd pick up dead animals, roadkill and wherever I found. I always had that fascination with anatomy, but it's a strange thing for a little kid to be doing, so I got known as the little monster. And that got shortened to Mon, and here I am, 49 years old and still collecting dead animals. The skeleton you see here is an old horse of mine named Banjo. Now, unfortunately, we had to put him down. He had cancer in the eye and it went to the brain and he lost control of his legs. It was one of those unfortunate things. This is the remains or the armature of a job I did for Muswellbrook 2 years ago now. It was a light horse piece. It was an up and over, as we called it, but it's to commemorate the charge of Beersheba and the light horse. So it's a horse and rider leaping the trenches. It was one of those sad experiences where actually it was my mate Ross that had to shoot him and I held him. So it was poignant at the time because it was a light horse sculpture and that was pretty much the fate of those horses. One in, all in. So I've always had a love for horses. There's something about a horse's movement, the way a horse is put together. A nice shaped horse, and especially in summertime, they've got a glistening coat and running through a paddock, you see every muscle move. You know, it's almost like an anatomy chart, you know, on steroids. I think it's an age-old thing too. You look back at the old stone man paintings in caves and whatnot. There was large depictions of running horse-type animals, you know. So I think that love of horses sort of strikes something in the old brain, you know. There's an innate thing there, an innate love, an innate attraction to the shape and movement of a horse. At the moment I'm working on a big piece for Curry Curry. It's probably the largest piece that I've dealt with at this point. It depicts a pit horse and a coal skip and his handler, the wheeler. So in total it'll probably be about 3.5 tonnes of bronze and nearly 8 metres long. One of those jobs that really struck a chord in me, my love of horses and history and the working man, you know. I love anything that depicts working Australia, you know, the real Australia, the nuts and bolts and the down and get dirty sort of stuff. My wife, when we met, assumed that I was a school teacher, and bless her, a few years into that, I decided it wasn't for me. I wanted to go back to art.
He's just a workaholic. He loves his work, loves it. And it's not work for Brett, it's a hobby. So it's his passion. You can't fight it, he just can't sit still. He makes everyone else around him feel lazy and guilty, but yeah, you just can't stop him, he just loves it.
She's my stick that keeps me upright, basically. And hand in hand, we're developing a new place and bigger gardens, sculpture gardens, a home. Kids have grown up, so it's been a great life. She had need fertilising too.
So how long have you got to go for these?
Oh, we're going to have to go and get some more of this flat stone. So we've had 27 years of me being an artist. In the early days, we struggled badly, you know, paying rent and putting food on the table. It's the usual story of a struggling artist. And she put up with all that. She's been supportive the whole time. Now we're getting ahead. I've got more work on that I can poke a stick at. I could probably live anywhere on the planet and still survive. And I'm fortunate that way. There's not many people in that boat. So living in a little hamlet like Wongarbin, I reap all the benefits. You know, I'm a happy camper.
Not a bad office.
It's probably the best office in the world. I'm not religious, but I equate it to going to church. It's sort of almost a religious experience to sit and watch the sun pop up like that. Those first rays of light, there's not too many people sit and watch a sunrise. I don't know, can't count how many I've seen, and every one of them just stuns me. That first little bit of light just popping over the hill there now, that's just made my day. Whatever happens in the rest of the day is inconsequential, really.
From puberty blues to menopause.
My whole life will be bookended by my hormonal upheavals.
Kathy Lett has never held back.
I've got to warn you guys, you will be ovulating by the end of the evening.
She's always relished every phase of life, even the bits that have been really hard. My guilt gland still throbs.
I think she needed to get away.
Now she wants to age disgracefully.
Wear whatever you like, do whatever you like, and do whoever you like. That's what I would say.
Australian Story, Monday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
America's stolen generation.
That's as genocidal as it gets.
Removed from their tribes and forced into boarding schools.
A cemetery at a school is not the norm. It was a prison camp.
My mom would say she's still lost somewhere. It's a very sad story for our family.
This whole history is almost invisible.
Finally, the truth revealed.
I can't rest until I've exhausted every avenue to find the children.
Foreign Correspondent, Thursday at 8 on ABC and ABC iView.
Look, it's a flashy gimmick to market the new season of Ruin.
This is genius. Great advertising.
Featuring your favourite advertising experts.
Collect us all.
Fully customisable to fit your personality. And they'll sing your favourite advertising jingles.
No, we won't, but we will deconstruct the way that brands are trying to sell to you.
It's the new and improved Ruin.
It's the same show as ever. Now let me out of here.
Ruin. Available June 8 at the new time of 8 p.m. Free delivery via ABC TV and ABC iView. Battery sold separately.
News live from Berlin. Change at the top as Australia's Conservative government admits election defeat. Anthony Albanese is to be sworn in as the new Prime Minister. His Labour Party is celebrating its first victory in 15 years. He's promising to unite the nation. Ukraine's president says victory will come through negotiation, not fighting. Volodymyr Zelensky orders the last remaining Mariupol defenders to surrender to save their lives. And tornadoes tear through western Germany. Storms leave a trail of destruction. Dozens are injured with widespread property damage. I'm Michael Oku. Welcome. Australia's Labour Party is celebrating victory in national elections. The vote brings to an end almost a decade of Conservative government. Labour leader Anthony Albanese is set to be the new Prime Minister. A fiercely fought election campaign was dominated by climate change, the pandemic, and the economy. Inflation is at its highest in nearly 20 years. Albanese says he wants to unite Australia.
Tonight, the Australian people have voted for change. I am humbled by this victory, and I'm honoured to be given the opportunity to serve as the 31st Prime Minister of Australia.
Australia's Conservatives were in power for almost a decade. Here's outgoing Prime Minister Scott Morrison conceding defeat.
I've always believed in Australians and their judgment, and I've always been prepared to accept their verdicts. And tonight they have delivered their verdict, and I congratulate Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party, and I wish him and his government all the very best. Now, there are many votes still to count, that is true, and there are many pre-polls and postals that will still come in. But I believe it's very important that this country has certainty.
Let's get more now from our reporter Jared Reid. Jared, first question is why you think the country decided for change.
I think a lot of factors are playing into the results that we're seeing today. What is clear is that voters do want change, and they have really turned away from this traditional two-party structure in Australia of the Conservative Liberals and the centre-left Labor Party, and there's been a huge surge in support for the Greens and climate-focused anti-corruption independents who are doing really well. Those independents largely have been taking seats off the incumbent Liberal Conservative party. So this is one factor. I think another factor is trust. That was a big part of this election. I think when voters were going to the ballot box today, maybe they were thinking, should a man like Scott Morrison, who's a staunch supporter of Australia's fossil fuel industry, is he the right person to lead a country that experts say is going to be facing severe weather events going forward, like we've recently seen with the floods and with the bushfires, not just climate, but also other challenges as well. Soaring prices, cost of living, very high inflation, which is at a 20-year high right now. Issues like childcare, aged care, housing. There's a rental crisis too. I think all of these factors just swirled together and led voters to want something different.
And that different comes in the name of Anthony Albanese and his incoming party. It strikes me that a lot of our viewers might not have heard his name. Tell us a little bit more about the incoming Prime Minister.
Well, Anthony Albanese is someone that has been involved in Australia's Labor movement since he was a very young man. He grew up in public housing. He was raised by a single mother, and this kind of working class, humble background is something that he has used to try and connect with voters. He is somebody that back when Australia was changing its prime ministers, he ended up being deputy prime minister for a very short period back in 2013. He is somebody that is not perhaps as ambitious on climate change as the Greens and independents would like him to be, but he has promised to make Australia a renewable energy superpower. He's also promised to tackle inflation, and he wants to give a referendum on giving Indigenous people an institutional voice in national policy making. He has largely led a safe campaign pretty much based on the fact of trust and not being as divisive a figure as perhaps the outgoing Prime Minister Scott Morrison is.
Inclusion, inclusion, inclusion is what I'm hearing there. So out with the Conservatives, in with Labor. What does this change in government actually portend for the Australian people and for the nation?
You know, I would love to be able to answer that, but there is a very... we are not quite there yet because for the simple fact is we don't know yet whether Labor will be able to lead a majority or a minority government. It's edging towards the 76 magic number it needs in the lower house. It's not quite there yet, and depending on how the postal votes go, there was a record number of postal votes, they still need to be counted, will depend on whether Labor can push forward its agenda or whether it will need to go further on things like climate and corruption. Then it would probably be comfortable with, if it wants the support and needs the support of parties like the Greens and these climate-focused independents.
That's our reporter and one of our resident Australians, Jared Reid. Thank you so much, Jared. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says victory will come at the negotiating table, not at the battlefield. Russia claims it has full control of the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol after months of fighting for the city. Zelensky says Ukraine wants to get back to normality.
Victory will be difficult, it will be bloody and in battle, but its end will be in diplomacy. I am very convinced of this. There are things that we can't bring to an end without sitting at the negotiation table. That's how it is, because we would like to get back everything, and Russia doesn't want to give back anything.
DW correspondent Max Zander is in Kyiv, and earlier I asked him what else Ukraine's leader had to say.
Well, Ukrainian President Zelensky made a few interesting statements in that address today. He also spoke about the situation in Mariupol and the end of the siege there. And he told his audience that he had many times asked foreign leaders to send military equipment and heavy weapons to help unblock with military means. And since this didn't happen, he had to resort to diplomacy. Another interesting fact he gave there was that it would be considered a victory to take back the territory that Ukraine held until the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians as of 24th of February. Everything else could then be dealt with at the negotiation table, meaning Russian annexed Crimea perhaps, and the Donbas region that was annexed by, that is under control by Russian-backed rebels since 2014. So it does seem that at the moment military means are not the only, is not going to make the difference alone, and the president is looking more into diplomatic it means, but that being said, the last meeting, the last negotiation between Ukrainian and their Russian counterparts was on 22nd of April, almost a month ago, and as of now, we're not aware of anything else scheduled in the next couple of days.
Again, after nearly 3 months, it certainly appears that the siege of Mariupol is over. Why was it so important for Russia to win control of this port city?
Right, so the Russians taking Mariupol, defeating essentially the Azov regiment as a huge propaganda win, great for their internal propaganda, and they're going to use that as to turn it, to make it look like a huge victory. But that being said, Mariupol lies strategically between Russian-annexed Crimea and the eastern parts, the parts that are held by Russian-backed separatists, and it's from a strategic point of view, it's helpful for the Russians to control this entire area and be able to create a land corridor, meaning that they can move troops and supplies freely from Crimea to the east. In addition to that, it also deprives the Ukrainians of access to the Sea of Azov, and most importantly, the defenders in the Azov steel plant got all the attention of Russian forces, of artillery, of special forces, of tanks, and these troops, now that were bound and kept busy, can now regroup and be moved to other parts of the country and engage in the offensive there.
Max, less than half a minute. What's the situation in the rest of Donbass?
Right, so the situation there is intensifying. The Russians are pushing forward with full force, and as I said, we're expecting that some of the Russian forces that were bound in and around Mariupol will actually engage in the fighting in the east there. And right now, as of now, there are only 2 cities. We're hearing that in the Luhansk region that are still controlled by Ukrainian forces, and some military experts expect that the city of Severodonetsk will be laid siege to in the next couple of days.
That is Max Zander in Kyiv. Many thanks, Max. Some of the other stories making news around the world now. The World Health Organization says there are now 130 confirmed and suspected cases of monkeypox worldwide. The outbreak is baffling scientists as the disease is normally only found in Central and West Africa. U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korea's Yoon Suk-yeol say they might expand joint military exercises in response to North Korean missile launches. Biden also says he's willing to meet North Korea's leader. Biden is visiting the region to strengthen U.S. alliances. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced his new cabinet. Career diplomat Catherine Colonna becomes the foreign minister. Elisabeth Borne will serve as France's first woman prime minister in 30 years. Tornadoes have injured dozens of people in western Germany. The city of Paderborn was hardest hit. Emergency services and volunteers are now clearing the wreckage.
After fierce winds wreaked havoc in the city of Paderborn, heavy equipment was deployed in the clear-up. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I never imagined that things could get so out of hand in such a short period of time. The evening before, a whirlwind swept through the city in western Germany. Areas across the country were hit by gales and heavy rain, causing this building to collapse and bury 14 people under it. All survived. One man was electrocuted when his cellar filled with water. As the lightning provided the light effects, the rock band Rammstein waited for the storm to pass the city of Leipzig before being able to continue their show.
Food and fuel prices have risen sharply since the invasion of Ukraine. Higher costs mean some people are getting creative. One woman in Germany has given up her car in favor of an alternative mode of transport.
It's the morning commute, but not as you know it. With fuel prices spiraling, 33-year-old Stephanie Kirschner decided to opt for a cheaper form of transport, giving up her SUV and travelling the old-fashioned way instead.
I no longer use my Toyota, which only gives me 17 miles per gallon, or even less when I transport things. So if I manage to ride the horse every day, then I save about 250 euros each month on fuel.
She admits her choice of transport is not popular with motorists, but delights the kids in the local village. And although she's able to make the 6-kilometre journey to work, Stephanie accepts it's not ideal for travelling more widely.
You can't just put a horse in a parking garage. It would be nice. I think a lot more people would use horses if more places accommodated them. But I don't think society is ready for that.
With no sign of the fuel crisis abating, for now Stephanie is determined to stay away from her 4 wheels and travel on 4 hooves instead.
Well, that's all for now. After the break, a DW documentary looks at biodiversity on the island of St. Helena. I'm Michael Oku. Thanks for watching DW, and do stay with us.
The following program is rated M for a mature audience. It contains coarse language.
Labor's election-winning lead. News poll has the ALP maintaining its gap on the coalition as the Prime Minister tells voters he will change his ways.
I can be a bit of a bulldozer when it comes to issues. I know there are things that are going to have to change with the way I do things.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And with only 5 days till the election, the polls are pointing to what could be a clear Labor majority. But some of the diehards at News Corp, whose Sunday papers came out to endorse the coalition over the weekend, are still doing their best to turn the tide, as you can see from Friday's front-page attacks on the Teal independents in Sydney's Daily Telegraph and Melbourne's Herald Sun.
You can run, but you can't hide.
Teal conceal.
They've got to hide.
How these so-called independents conceal their agendas.
Underneath those headlines, both the big city tabloids ran the same exclusive story from John Rolfe, which kicked off like this.
High-profile independents trumpeting transparency have arrogantly refused to properly detail where they stand on issues affecting our nation, such as China's advance in the Pacific, changes to income tax, defence spending, transgender athletes and illegal boat arrivals.
And inside there was more, with both papers running 2-page spreads under this banner headline.
The arrogant minority.
A radical reality facing the nation.
Now, this massive attack is supposed to be a news story, not an editorial or an opinion column. So it's breaking the golden rule of journalism that news and opinion should be kept separate. The story's language is anything but neutral, branding these candidates who threaten the Libs as arrogant, so-called Teal independents, silver spoon candidates who won't come clean. There's plenty of opinion there. And the key charge is ridiculous anyway, because the independents make no attempt to hide their 3 key policies: action on climate change, a federal ICAC, and gender equality. Are they really hiding an agenda on China and tax? There's absolutely no evidence that they are. Meanwhile, in The Australian, in an earlier rant that was at least labelled commentary, Greg Sheridan warned readers,
the most destructive, harmful and dangerous vote anyone can make in the forthcoming election is for a Teal independent or the Greens. They are both a direct threat to our national security. The Teal independents are not only populists, they are extremists.
Meanwhile, on Sky After Dark, Paul Murray was also doing his best to stem the flood, night after night after night.
Viewers, as always, our focus remains the same, remains absolute. We have 12 days to save the country from the mad left. 11 days to save the country from the mad left.
10 days to save the country from the mad left. 9 days to save the country from the mad left.
You get the picture, and even more so with the sound off, because the straplines are straight from Liberal Party HQ, with Albo the villain who will economically destruct this nation, blow the budget, and commit economic vandalism. Paul Murray has never made a secret of barracking for the coalition, or Team Blue, as he calls it. Indeed, in an embarrassing hot mic moment in 2018, he admitted that Sky After Dark was a, quote, liberal echo chamber. But his partisan parroting made headlines again last week when The Guardian got its hands on a leaked tape.
Sky News host Paul Murray in expletive-laden anti-Labor tirade to audience before Peter Dutton interview.
To be honest, Murray's G-up for a live Brisbane audience wasn't that different to what you get on air, except for the swearing.
Now, Mark McGowan has a poodle-like fucking elbow.
But maybe even he wouldn't say this about transgender swimmer Leah Thomas if he knew he was being recorded.
A Sheila with a penis swam faster than a bunch of women without a penis, who has a girlfriend with a vagina, but he is a lesbian. Welcome to 2022, people. Welcome to 2022.
Yes, it's Murray's mission to keep the woke at bay. And that is one he shares with lawyer Catherine Deeves, the Liberal candidate fixated on transgender issues, who's trying to win back Tony Abbott's seat of Warringah and who made front-page news in Friday's Sydney Morning Herald.
Tearful Deeves defends right to speak her mind.
In many ways, Catherine Deeves has been the soap opera of this campaign, the leader of a cultural crusade that's never quite rallied voters to the flag, or so it seems. Stoutly defended by the PM, who picked her, she's been criticised by moderate Liberals who fear her divisive views could lose them their seats. Since the campaign began, the Conservative media have been trying to cast her as a champion of women's sport, who is speaking up for silent Australians, with the telly giving her this front page.
Deeves exclusive.
They are all with me.
And a small army of commentators on Sky have also championed her cause.
You are one person who has stood up relentlessly and said, save our sport, save our girls, save our women. You're the ideal candidate for the Liberal Party.
But it's not just women's sport that Deeves has been whistling about, as we found out last month when Samantha Maiden broke this story on news.com.au.
Catherine Deeves has apologised for describing trans kids as surgically mutilated and sterilised. Ms Deeves issued a public apology for the language after news.com.au revealed she had wiped her social media accounts, including posts that said she was triggered by the LGBT rainbow flag.
And soon after that startling revelation, Sam Maiden offered several more. That Deeves had compared trans activists to Nazis and sex offenders, linked the trans community to serial killers, suggested gender dysphoria was misdiagnosed autism, and called a surrogate birth to gay US politician Pete Buttigieg a human rights violation. It was crazy stuff, but the PM was happy to defend her, at least against calls for her to stand down.
She has stepped over the line, and she's acknowledged that. But what I won't allow is for those who are seeking to cancel Catherine, simply because she has a different view to them on the issue of women and girls in sport. I'm not going to indulge that.
And thus, a culture war was declared. And the media, who arguably had more important issues to chase, like affordable housing, fixing aged care, or dealing with climate change, went running to the front line.
Miss Deeves, just wondering if we could ask you a few questions. Are you transphobic? Have you been around that? Rushing her to an elevator to escape the cameras. If you win the seat, you're going to have to answer some questions, Miss Deeves.
Deeves spent several days dodging the media in this fashion. And when she did stop for an interview, it was to cast herself as the victim.
I'm meeting you in a secret location. You've removed yourself from your family and your house. Why is that?
I have received death threats. I have had to have the police and the AFP involved. My safety has been threatened.
That was 3 weeks ago, after which Deeves went to ground again. But last week, the PM was defending her once more, and not just on women's sport.
Have you spoken to her about the language? Have you spoken to
No, I haven't had the
Catherine
opportunity
Deeves?
to speak to her about it.
What is speak to her, Prime Minister?
Sorry?
Will you speak to her about what she's been saying?
I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to
In
talk.
your opinion, what is the correct terminology?
Well, I'm not a surgeon, and so I will rely on the Chief Medical Officer.
But why were Dee's views on transgender kids making news afresh? Because Sky's Chris Kenny had tracked her down and she had walked back her original apology.
Catherine, Chris Kenny,
Hello.
pleased to meet you. We haven't met in the flesh before.
No, we haven't.
Done some interviews on television but never met in the flesh.
That's right.
You've been pretty hard to catch up with. The Liberal Party doesn't seem to want us to do interviews with you.
And you can perhaps see why, especially since Dee's told Kenny she stood by things she'd said.
So you're not really apologising or stepping back from that language?
Well, I'm apologising for how people might have perceived it.
But were the Liberals really trying to muffle her? Not according to former Liberal Party staffer turned government critic Nikki Savva, who dropped this tidbit into her Sydney Morning Herald column.
According to 3 New South Wales Liberal sources, Deeves's campaign is now being run out of the Prime Minister's office. Deeves's Sky interview recanting her apology was set up to resuscitate the issue, with the Prime Minister banking on getting asked about it at his press conference the next morning.
Which is, of course, what happened. However, the PM's office has denied it's running Dee's campaign, and Kenny rejects any notion that he has been used as a prop.
I found out on Monday where Catherine Deeves was going to be at pre-poll, and we got there and interviewed her on the footpath, as you saw. But the pathetic conspiracy theorists of the Green left media spot another evil Conservative plot.
There is another theory, of course, that Dee's chat with Kenny and her tearful Herald front page was simply a candidate out of control. As Sam Maiden told RM Breakfast on Friday,
her campaign team have openly told journalists that they have a strategy of quote-unquote going rogue. And what that means is that they believe that they've been silenced early on by the Liberal Party HQ, and so her campaign team is actually encouraging journalists to go down to Warringah and bounce her, and that's what's happening.
One way or another, the headlines got out there. But is transgender sport a defining issue for Australians, as the PM asserts? Not according to a Guardian Essential poll, with voters ranking it in 8th place, below cost of living, health, jobs and climate change. And not according to the ABC's David Spears, who told RM Breakfast,
this is not a frontline issue amongst any of the voters that I've met wandering around marginal seats.
No one's mentioned it?
Over the last 5 weeks, no one.
Yet it seems to be a subject the Prime Minister wants to fight on. It was he who picked Deeves for the job and knew how important the issue was for her. And he's been saying her views on trans kids and fairness in sport and her right to express them send an important message to voters.
I think Australians are getting pretty fed up with having to walk on eggshells every day because they may or may not say something one day that's going to upset someone.
But did the culture war ever get going? In the media, the answer is possibly yes, given questions like this to the leaders.
How do you define a woman, Mr Albanese?
An adult female.
An adult female?
Yeah.
Mr Morrison?
Yes, I'm adult, a member of the female sex.
But did voters harangue politicians about it? Did it get them fired up? Not as far as we know, despite the media's and the PM's eagerness to have it centre stage. All in all, it was a strange diversion from the main battles in this campaign. But if the PM's culture war gamble did not come off, at least he's been having more luck with his photo ops, which, as always, the media have been lapping up. Filming him playing pastry chef in Townsville, a barista at a cafe in Sutherland, Sydney, and a seamstress in Western Sydney. We've also learnt of the PM's passion for balls, from passing the footy to kicking the footy, bending the knee at bowls, and tossing the basketball. And what makes a successful photo op? One that blossoms into a friendly front page like this.
More sugar for election sweetener.
And what about Albanese's activities? For most of the campaign, he has stuck to wearing a high-vis vest, drinking coffee, holding babies, and fronting the media pack, where last week he was asked this classic question.
What do you think the rate of inflation will be in a year's time under Labour?
And if you thought that was silly, how about the one he copped the week before from Seven's Jennifer Beshwati?
How is it appropriate for your member for Lions, Brian Mitchell, to tweet about if this debate doesn't wrap up soon, we're going to need mops, women don't do well holding on?
Well, I haven't seen that tweet. When is it from?
A few years ago, I think.
When is it from?
2011.
Okay.
And this question last week to the PM on day 32 of the campaign.
Are you tired? You seem tired. I saw a frown earlier. And secondly...
But journalists are not just asking stupid questions, they're also going for some very silly stories. Like that favourite of every campaign, the psychic croc.
But a local salty is tipped who'll win the federal election. Goliath the crocodile made his prediction today.
This undecided voter took his time to pick Leichhardt's next federal member, but eventually made a snap decision.
And who did he pick?
After sizing up his prey, he crowned Warren Entsch the winner.
Yes, who needs dodgy polls when you have a croc of you-know-what like that? And if crocs aren't your thing, then let's look at the stars.
We analysed each political candidate's star sign to see which one would make a better leader.
Although Pedestrian did add this disclaimer.
Do not use astrology to inform your decision when voting.
But the silliness does not stop there. Here's some confected outrage on 7's Sunrise.
Melbourne locals are not impressed with Anthony Albanese this morning after the Labor leader appeared to mispronounce Melbourne. Take a look.
This project will transform the way that Melbournians can get around this city.
Yes, Anthony Albanese said Melbournians instead of Melburnians. And the Daily Mail reported that residents were outraged.
Well, that's it. I was going to vote for him, but that's a step too far. Absolute drivel,
wrote one annoyed local online.
In fact, the Daily Mail has been following Anthony Albanese's campaign closely, with big stories like the yawning baby on his lap, him talking for 2 minutes about his old job in a pancake shop, and did you catch their scoop about the muffin?
Bizarre moment. Labor leader refuses to eat a muffin at campaign event before talking about them 3 times.
But you know, the election campaign really is bizarre when this happens at a prime ministerial event.
So thank you very much all for coming, for supporting this great candidate for the area.
Excuse me, who are you?
Who I am? I'm Kim Jong. Come on, it's pretty obvious.
Hard to beat that, but there is still 5 days to go. That's all from us for tonight. There's more on our website where you can stream or download the programme. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday. But for now, until next week, goodbye.
This week on News Breakfast, we've got all the wash-up and analysis after the weekend's federal election.
And strap yourself in. 36 years after the original blockbuster took our breath away, we're going back to the danger zone as the Top Gun Maverick premieres. See you then.
Anatomy of an election.
You've had kitchen sinks, babies and bathwaters, you name it, it's all being thrown.
You've got to be an authentic character. The public figure you out pretty quickly. And the voters' verdict as Australia decides.
Character means a lot to me as far as who I'm going to vote for.
Interesting they scanned back and show his wedding ring.
He just didn't answer the question.
How can I vote there with? That's really tough.
What's going to happen?
It's going to get messy, it's going to get ugly, God only knows.
Four Corners, Monday, ABC TV and ABC iView.
Welcome to The World This Week. I'm Beverly O'Connor. Coming up, Russian forces take control of the port city of Mariupol after Ukraine orders its garrison to stand down. COVID-19 sweeps through North Korea's unvaccinated population as its leader lashes out at health officials. And millions of people swelter in temperatures above 45 degrees as India and Pakistan endure record-breaking heat waves. Well, after months of bombing, Ukraine has ceded control of the besieged port of Mariupol to Russia. Some troops were evacuated from their last stronghold, while Moscow claims to have captured hundreds more. But as one city falls to the invading forces, another could soon be reclaimed. Our Europe correspondent Steve Kinane reports from Kharkiv.
One by one, buses carry troops to safety from the Azovstal steelworks. More than 260 soldiers making their way out. many on stretchers, badly injured from 82 days of fighting to defend the last holdout in the besieged city of Mariupol.
Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive. That's our principle. The work continues to return guys home, and this work requires delicacy and time.
Russia's agreed to the fighters' evacuation to separatist-controlled territory. The terms of an exchange are still to be ironed out. But the combat mission in Mariupol is now over.
Ми отримали критично важливий час.
We have gained critically important time to form reserves, to regroup forces and to receive aid from our partners.
It brings to an end one of the longest and fiercest battles of the war so far. But as one city falls, there is pushback elsewhere. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defence has released video that it says is taken north of the country's second largest city of Kharkiv. Soldiers pose by a boundary marker in Ukraine's colours. They say that here at least, they've expelled Russians to the border. For these volunteers, the Battle of Kharkiv is not over yet.
We hope it's over, but now we have to be ready for a proper defence and not let anybody in.
At this metro station, there are still over 300 people living underground. Some had their homes destroyed, others remain fearful of more shelling.
We're not sure that war here is over. There are still explosions.
The military still won't let people into the villages like the one up the road behind me. They're saying it's still too dangerous due to shelling. But there is a sense of optimism that these areas will soon open up. And that will be quite a moment for the people of this city and its surrounds, given the Russian occupation and the constant bombardment that they have endured. These people will be hoping that any liberation is a lasting one. Steve Kinane, ABC News, Kharkiv.
North Korea has sent in the army to lead its response to a COVID outbreak as the virus sweeps through its unvaccinated population. But offers of outside help are still being ignored. Here's North Asia correspondent James Ocean.
As fever cases sweep across the country, state television reveals a confident commander-in-chief leading the way. Presiding over a Politburo meeting, cigarette in hand, Kim Jong-un accused his officials of being inadequate and slammed their response to the first confirmed COVID-19 outbreak as immature. There's speculation this parade, marking 90 years of the country's military, was a super-spreader event. Huge crowds, unmasked and not socially distanced. Soon after, the nation's non-existent vaccine program and severe lack of medical supplies were exposed.
We lacked awareness and understanding of the disease and did not know how to treat it.
It's impossible to pin down the extent of the outbreak in the secretive nation. North Korea has confirmed more than 1.7 million cases of fever, but it says the virus situation is taking a favourable turn. The armed forces have been mobilised, and according to state media, treatments ranging from painkillers to home remedies are working.
We were sick, but every night and morning I made us gargle with salt water.
It's what's not being shown that has experts worried.
You need antivirals. They don't have that. I'm certain of it. It's a matter of incredible urgency that we get the pills to them as soon as possible.
But offers of vaccines are being met with silence.
The regime is probably worried about the optics of it, the optics that the regime is not capable enough.
It's just terrible, you know, there's 26 million people who are already living under one of the harshest regimes in the world, and now they're facing this terrible health situation on top.
North Korea is desperately poor, with almost half the population undernourished. The United Nations has warned that locking down the country would have dire consequences for those already struggling to feed their families. James Oaten, ABC News.
Several social media companies will be investigated by the US state of New York after a teenage gunman live-streamed the fatal shooting of 10 people at a Buffalo supermarket. The FBI says the 18-year-old committed an act of racially motivated violent extremism when he opened fire at African-American shoppers. Our North America correspondent Carrington Clark is in Buffalo.
A day after the horrific attack, the community of Buffalo, New York, is trying to comprehend what they've lost.
We came out here because my little brother's birthday was yesterday. He was turning 3 years old. My dad came to the store to grab him a birthday cake, and he cashed out, but he never made it out the store. And now our life will never be the same again.
He was one of 10 people killed when an 18-year-old opened fire in a supermarket, live streaming it on social media. It's been revealed a day before the attack, the white teenager drove to Buffalo from his home several hours away to do reconnaissance. Police say they're in no doubt the attack on the largely black neighbourhood was an act of racially motivated violent extremism.
Father, we need you. We must all work together to address the hate that remains a stain on the soul of America.
A year ago, the gunman was taken by police to hospital after threatening to carry out a shooting at his high school. He was given a mental health evaluation and then released shortly after. The police are continuing to gather evidence at the crime scene here. Part of the investigation is focused on the suspect's online behaviour. This tragic incident is once again raising questions about whether the tech giants are doing enough to combat hate speech.
I want them to sit in a room, look me in the eye and tell me, have you done everything humanly possible to make sure that you are monitoring this content the second it hits your platform?
This tight-knit community has only just begun dealing with the devastating consequences of being the target of a hate-filled teenager with a gun. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Buffalo.
A Fijian police officer has been suspended over accusations he violently arrested a bus driver. A video of the incident has been shared widely, sparking debate about police brutality in the country. Here's Marianne Farr.
Fiji police are conducting an internal investigation after the incident at a bus stop in Labasa on Monday. A police officer was filmed yanking forcefully on the neck of 30-year-old driver Elvin Manny, who is later heard saying, "I can't breathe." The footage has been shared thousands of times on social media. This is a snippet of that video and a warning that some people may find this scene distressing. Mr. Manny was later charged with giving a false name and assaulting the policeman who arrested him. He was released on bail on Tuesday afternoon. The officer in question has also been suspended from duties pending an investigation into his conduct. Fijian MP Lenora Gerengeratabua witnessed the incident and tried to intervene, asking the police officer to stop. In the video, she's heard saying violence is not the way. The MP has described the event as shocking. There are now widespread calls to address police violence in Fiji, which the Fiji Law Society says is a systemic issue. It's understood the driver, Elvin Manny, will be filing charges against the police officer who arrested him.
Sri Lanka's newly appointed Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has issued a grim warning to citizens that the next couple of months will be the most difficult in their lives. The embattled government is also printing money in order to pay public sector workers.
Drivers in Sri Lanka ignoring the government's plea to not join the lines for fuel until deliveries to petrol stations have been completed.
I've been in the queue for more than 6 hours.
Armed police stand guard as desperate citizens wait for supplies to turn up.
How will we manage without fuel? All the vehicles are here. We do not have any work now.
Supplies of fuel across the country are critically low, threatening power cuts of up to 15 hours a day. There's also a shortage of 14 essential medicines and other basic goods. The newly installed Prime Minister says Sri Lanka urgently needs $107 million in foreign exchange to pay for essential imports.
The next couple of months will be the most difficult ones in our lives. We must prepare ourselves to make some sacrifices and face the challenges of this period. Against my own wishes, I'm compelled to permit printing money in order to pay state sector employees and to pay for essential goods and services. However, we must remember that printing money leads to the depreciation of the rupee.
The new administration also plans to privatise Sri Lankan airlines to raise money. But protesters have had enough of waiting. They blame President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his family for the worst economic crisis since independence in 1948, and they want him out. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
Record-breaking heat waves in India and Pakistan are seeing millions of people coping with daily temperatures above 45 degrees. Scientists say it should remind the world that the effects of climate change are being felt right now. Our South Asia correspondent, Avani Dias.
For decades, scientists have warned climate change would bring nightmarish heat waves. This gigantic landfill on the outskirts of Delhi is the size of 50 football fields. It's been burning for days during a record-breaking heat wave, a sign that the nightmare many predicted has arrived.
For decades now, I think the warning bells were already there, where we've been telling people that extremes are going to increase decade after decade, and of course the intensity frequencies are changing.
Indian summers are always hot, but the early and intense heat waves that struck in March and April are the worst since record keeping began. Parts of India have faced daily maximum temperatures of 47 degrees for the past 2 months. In the scorching heat, 4 fires ignited at landfills around Delhi, leaving the 50,000 residents who live around these rubbish piles to deal with the toxic stench of burning plastic and rotten food.
No one would live here if they didn't have to. We are living, earning and feeding our children. Why would we live here if we had other work? We would be living like other families.
Every morning, Geetha Devi gets ready for work at the landfill on her doorstep. Lately, things have been tough. She's copping the unbearable temperatures, smoke and the regular difficulties of her job.
It is not good to live here. There are so many problems.
Like 49% of Indians, Geetha works outdoors, selling iron from the landfill to make a little money. Geetha's in the vast majority of Indians who can't afford to cool down after working a full day in the heat. Hiding from the temperatures is not an option.
I don't like living in the heat, but we have no choice but to live here. During the fire, we weren't able to work. We were not allowed to go onto the landfill due to the fire, so we were left hungry. We are dependent on this landfill for our livelihood.
In these temperatures, which pass 40 degrees every day, the human body struggles to cool down. Hundreds of people have died in this heat wave, but there could be many more fatalities that haven't been recorded.
So definitely we are not prepared for that in terms of the health implications of it and to handle the health implications, because once you basically experience dehydration and a heat stroke, it entirely depends on how severe the condition is for the medical personnel to be able to deal with the situation and recover the person.
Scientists say there is no doubt this heat is linked to climate change. Studies have shown that severe heat waves in parts of India are twice as likely due to human activity. And they say things will just get worse if nothing's done about climate change.
By 2030s, if we are not on the path as a world where we basically, have a steep turnaround, we are in for a disaster for many species on planet Earth, and including the human race.
In Delhi, the heatwave has caused riverbeds to dry out. In Pakistan, glaciers in the Himalayas are melting, causing flooding and a bridge to collapse.
There would be massive heat waves, there would be more floods, there would be more natural disasters and natural calamities in the future.
India is now facing a power crisis because of coal shortages caused by record electricity demand as people try to cool down. There's a push for the government to decarbonise, but climate activists like 13-year-old Arav Seth say it's taking too long.
I want the government to create policies and also implement policies for the environment, because right now most of the pollution is created by the industries, by the energy sector and by the fossil fuel companies. And I want the government to restrict those industries from doing these things, from polluting the environment.
India is among the most vulnerable to climate change, but Arav says no nation can afford to look away.
Right now here in my country, in India, we are facing massive heat waves that are only worsening the conditions of our environment, of the humanity here. So if we do not act now, Australia would be in the same condition.
What can I say? Many politicians come and go, but no one cares for us. No one cares how we are living. No one cares for poor people, they just care about the rich.
Analysts are warning of more political turmoil in Lebanon after Hezbollah lost its majority in national elections. It's feared a polarised parliament could lead to policy paralysis and undermine efforts to rebuild a crippled economy. Here's Middle East correspondent Alison Horn.
Anger at the ruling class has been brewing in Lebanon since the economic collapse that plunged 3/4 of the population into poverty. But not even experienced political analysts could predict this outcome. People have taken to the streets across the country celebrating the change in power that they hope will improve the nation's prospects. Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah and its allies won less than half of the 128 seats up for grabs, effectively ending their 4-year reign of power. But who will lead is still a little unclear. No one group has claimed enough seats to secure outright leadership. But it's expected power will go to the right-wing Christian group Lebanese Forces, with the support of independent candidates. This result is seen as punishment for Hezbollah and its factions, who many feel have done virtually nothing to address the major economic meltdown 3 years ago that left most Lebanese without electricity, medicine and even food. But this result could still end in more turmoil for the people of Lebanon. It'll lead to a parliament that's highly polarised, with the two main blocs, Lebanese Forces and Hezbollah, staunchly opposed to each other. It'll mean passing any legislation to begin the country's financial recovery could be a challenge.
Well, returning to the war in Ukraine, in the city of Kharkiv, where Russian forces appear to have retreated. The city endured weeks of shelling, but now some of the surrounding villages are slowly starting to open up. Here's Steve Kinane.
Malarogun was a peaceful hamlet just 30 kilometres from Russian territory. Full of Russian speakers, it was a village with close links to its northern neighbours. Ties irretrievably destroyed by Putin's brutal invasion. The Russians seized Yulia's house and turned it into an observation post before trashing it on their way out.
They brought grief and destruction. We were living a happy life here. They destroyed everything in a second.
But the Ukrainians fought back, taking trenches, destroying tanks, and wiping out this warehouse that had been commandeered and used to store ammunition. Just like in the battle for Kiev, the Ukrainians drove the Russians out of the villages they'd occupied.
Why did Russians come here? Because they thought they would be welcomed with salt and bread.
Welcome, Russia.
Now the Ukrainian military are helping these communities return to the liberated areas and making sure these villages are now safe.
When you walk down this street, you can see the absolute destruction inflicted on this village by Russian forces. And there's also what you don't see. The local military are telling us that this area, this village, was left booby-trapped and it was left mined. So when civilians came back to their homes, there were bombs inside their electronic equipment, inside their furniture.
The Ukrainians are deeply thankful for the military aid the West has been sending, including the Bushmaster vehicles sent by Australia.
Thank you very much for all Australian people for Bushmasters. It's very nice machine, and my military brothers very cool in Bushmaster and push racism home.
Soon these villages will need a different type of aid when they begin to rebuild these war-ravaged communities. Steve Kinane, ABC News, Malarogan.
Well, thousands of women across the United States have taken to the streets to demonstrate for abortion rights. A Supreme Court ruling is expected next month and stems from a legal challenge in the southern state of Mississippi. Our North America correspondent Jade McMillan reports from the capital, Jackson.
At Mississippi's only remaining abortion clinic, the day begins early. On one side of the fence are the volunteer escorts, trying to ensure privacy for the women with appointments. On the other side are those trying to convince them to change their minds.
Ma'am, how much on your baby?
The Pink House, as it's known by locals, is at the centre of a legal challenge against a Mississippi law banning most abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy.
He says, hey, abortion is murder.
A leaked draft opinion suggests the Conservative majority on the US Supreme Court will uphold the legislation and overturn Roe v Wade, an almost 50-year-old ruling guaranteeing nationwide access to abortion up until around 24 weeks of pregnancy.
We all know what it was like prior to Roe v. Wade, and a lot of us know people who went through horrendous things to access abortion care, in parentheses. So many women died.
If Roe is unravelled, states such as Mississippi would have the power to swiftly ban abortion altogether, a prospect welcomed by campaigners such as Omar Peters. He once considered himself to be pro-choice, but says his opinion shifted, partly due to the experience of a family member who regrets terminating a pregnancy.
The belief system is on our side. We believe we're on the right side of history, so that hopefully all of our steps will one day abolish abortion.
Mississippi might be the epicentre of this legal battle, but the consequences of this case will be felt much more widely. It's estimated around half of America's 50 states could ban or significantly restrict access to abortion if Roe v Wade is overturned. Clusters of those states across the South and Midwest would leave many communities hundreds of kilometres away from a provider. And in one of America's poorest states, these women argue the cost of travelling would prove too high.
I mean, yes, there should be rules and regulations that go along with it, like ages and like how many times you can do it, but you shouldn't just take away the choice altogether.
You won't drown out the voice of God on Judgment Day.
The court's final decision is expected within weeks, deepening the divide over an intensely political and personal issue. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Jackson.
In Afghanistan, secret schools are being set up to educate girls in defiance of the Taliban, who've refused to allow them back into the classroom. Officials have repeatedly said girls' schools will reopen, but secondary schools have so far remained shut. A decision to reopen them was overruled by the Taliban leadership earlier this year.
Hidden away in a residential neighbourhood, a small but powerful act of defiance. These teenage girls, like most in the country, have not been allowed back to school by the Taliban, so they're attending lessons secretly. Today's class, trigonometry. For their security, we're not revealing anyone's name or identity.
Are you afraid of what could happen to you?
If they arrest me, they beat me, but it's worth it to do that.
It's worth it?
Of course, it's worth it.
Back in March, it seemed girls' schools were finally reopening. But at the last minute, the Taliban leadership overruled the decision. For students here, the pain is still raw.
On the day we went to school, they told us it's not clear if girls will be allowed or not. Perhaps they will, later on. It's been 2 months now, and it hasn't happened. It makes me so sad.
Younger girls have been allowed back to school, but it's not clear when or if older girls will be. The Taliban say they need to create the correct Islamic environment first. Taliban officials admit that female education is a sensitive issue for them, with some influential hardliners apparently opposed to it. But in private, others within the group have expressed their disappointment at the decision not to allow all girls' schools to reopen. A number of religious scholars linked to the Taliban have made public declarations in support of the right of girls to learn. Sheikh Rahimullah Haqqani is an Afghan cleric well respected by the Taliban, based in Pakistan. On a recent trip to Kabul, he met senior figures in the group. He's careful not to criticize the continued closure of girls' schools, but has issued a religious decree stating they can and should be educated.
There is no justification in Sharia to say female education is not allowed. No justification at all. All the religious books have stated female education is permissible and obligatory. Because, for example, if a woman gets sick in an Islamic environment like Afghanistan or Pakistan, and needs treatment, it's much better if she is treated by a female doctor.
Boys of all ages are back in the classroom, but the Taliban have now formed a committee to debate what to do about girls' secondary schools. For now, it seems their most hardline elements are the ones deciding what the country's future will look like.
And that is the program. You can always watch the show on iView, and there are more world news and interviews at the ABC's YouTube channel. And do join me on The World, weeknights on the ABC News channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Thanks for your company. Bye-bye.